Let's take a moment and talk about my favorite brand. Let's talk Skims. Putting on my Skims while getting dressed has now redefined my feel good, look good mentality. One of my favorites is their Fits Everybody dipped front thong. You guys know I have talked about this time and time again. This is the most comfortable article of clothing that I've put on my body. Trust me, guys, you are going to love it. So shop my favorite bras and underwear at skims.com, and after you place your order, be sure to let them know that I sent you. Select podcast in the survey and be sure to select my show in the drop-down menu that follows. Hello everyone, what is up? Welcome back to another exclusive episode of Killer Instinct here on Patreon. I hope you all have had a great week thus far, and thank you for being here with me today. Now, I am very excited to jump into this case today because, as you can tell, we are talking about the solved murder of Aileen Seiden. However, even though this is solved, I'm very curious to hear your guys' opinion on this case for a multitude of reasons, but I'm very curious to know where you land on this case. I feel as we go through it and once we get to the conclusion of this case, it's going to be interesting to hear your opinions on where you think you lie regarding who you believe in this case, what you believe really to have happened. And the question of why this happened and what led to this is one that still stumps investigators of this case to this day. So I'm very curious to know what you will have to say about it. So with that all being said, let's jump right on into it today. Aileen Seiden was born to her parents, Martha and Frank, and she grew up in Miami, Florida. Aileen was the youngest child out of her and her older sister, Francesca. Now, when Francesca was 16 and Aileen was only 9 years old, they experienced their first monumental loss in their lives when they lost their mother to her battle to cancer. As you can imagine, this was an absolutely devastating and heartbreaking time in Francesca and Aileen's lives. However, 6 years later, they experienced another incredible loss when they lost their father to a heart attack. This meant that Aileen, at only 14 years old, now had neither of her parents. Both of her parents had passed away, and Francesca was only 22 years old at that time as well. But after both of their parents had passed, Francesca stepped up to the plate and became Aileen's legal guardian. According to Francesca, she said that becoming her sister's legal guardian was the only option at that time. She wasn't not going to do that. It was just the automatic response to everything that was happening around them. And according to Francesca, she said that there were so many things happening at that time, as you can imagine, grieving the loss of not only their mother and their father, but also the huge shift in roles that Francesca was experiencing. Not only was she having to deal with grief, but now she was also having to deal with becoming a legal guardian, essentially being the parent to her sister. So there was so much happening. There was so much change in both of their lives that Francesca said that her and Aileen really didn't have the chance to grieve or talk about what they were going through. However, she did say that Francesca and Aileen just loved and supported each other through this next chapter of their lives and for the entirety of their lives. 7 years after their father's passing, when Aileen was 21 years old and Francesca was 29 years old, Francesca decided to move from Miami to Los Angeles, California. And this was really the first time that Aileen and Francesca had been independent from each other. It was the first time that they had been separated. And it was really the first time for Aileen that she had been on her own. But for all things considered, Aileen was really thriving in this environment and in this new chapter of her life. She got a job as a property manager. She had her own apartment. She was paying her own bills. She was very independent. And when Aileen visited Francesca in Los Angeles in the year 2016, Francesca was actually surprised to see how independent her sister was and how she really had come into her own. Again, they had spent so much time being together and so much time just leaning on each other through their process of grief that once it finally came time for them to be independent, it was shocking in a good way for Francesca to see her sister in this new light. But after this visit in 2016, when Aileen returned back home to Miami, this is when everything in her life took a dramatic turn. This is when a man named Zachary Abel comes into the picture. Aileen and Zachary had known each other for years. They actually met when they were teenagers in high school. And during that time of high school, Zach definitely did have more of that bad boy reputation. Him and Aileen were not close by any means. They were just simply acquaintances, but that all changed years later when the two of them reconnected and began dating. Now, in the beginning of this relationship, Aileen loved Zach's fun and adventurous and playful side. Those who knew Zach said that he was very entertaining. He was the life of the party and he was very extroverted. And those were qualities that Aileen really liked in Zach. But there was something very unconventional about Zach and Aileen's relationship that we're about to dive into, because the relationship between Zach and Aileen was not just between Zach and Aileen, because there was a third party involved in this relationship. Zach and Aileen were in a throuple, which is a 3-person romantic relationship. And the third party of this throuple was a woman named Christina Araujo. Now, Christina and Zach had actually been dating for years leading up to Zach beginning a relationship with Aileen. They began dating around 2008, so they had been together for a very long period of time. Christina was actually 8 years older than Zach, and it was clear to those who knew Christina and Zach and their relationship dynamic that Christina was definitely the dominating one in the relationship. She definitely was the one who was more controlling. She was very demanding, and Zach pretty much just followed Christina's lead. That is what a lot of people had to say regarding their relationship. And the two weren't just in a romantic relationship together, because they also were business partners together. The two of them owned a used car dealership. So not only were they having the romantic part of their relationship, but they also were in business together. So it was a mix of business and pleasure. And oftentimes that gets complicated. And for Christina and Zach, it was. Now, one of Christina and Zach's friends who actually witnessed their relationship was a man named Mike. And Mike said that the first time he met Christina and Zach was when the three of them ended up coincidentally at the same bar together. Mike said that Zach walked up to him while Mike was sitting at the bar in 2011 and complimented his t-shirt. And a few moments later, Christina also walked up and the three of them began engaging in conversation. Mike was learning about Zach and Christina's relationship. They were all just chit-chatting. But Mike did say that Christina said something to him in this conversation that definitely took him aback. It was something that he didn't normally hear. It's not something that normally gets brought up in conversation. And it had to do with Christina's father. Christina went on to say that her dad was a major in the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department, and that if her or Zach were to ever get in any kind of legal trouble, that her dad would always be able to take care of it. Now, again, Mike remembered noting this down, and he remembered being suspicious about this comment because, again, it's not something that you typically just say, especially to someone that you only first met. It just seemed very odd. But regardless, after this first meet, Mike, Zach, and Christina continued to hang out just on a friendship level. Mike would just hang out with them just as friends. They would all drink together for years and years. And again, Mike said that most of their outings included wild parties, wild nights, lots of alcohol. That was the kind of friendship that they had. They were definitely more party friends. Mike was actually shocked in 2016, so 5 years later since he had first met Christina and Zach, when he saw Zach with a new woman, and that new woman was Aileen. Now, Mike said it was very clear from the moment he saw Zach and Aileen together that this was a romantic relationship. This was not some sort of platonic, just friend that Zach had. It was clear that they were in a romantic relationship together. And Mike said it was very clear to him that Zach had two women in his life, being Christina and Aileen. And according to Mike, he said that this was an unusual situation from the very start of it. People who knew Zach said that Zach had tried multiple times over the years to break off his relationship with Christina, especially when he met Aileen. It was said that when he met Aileen and began dating Aileen, it was not the case of a throuple. It was the case of Zach just having two separate girlfriends, and they both knew about each other. Christina knew that Zach was seeing Aileen, and Aileen knew that Zach was seeing Christina, and that they had a long-standing, long-term relationship leading up to that, and neither one of them were happy about it. But according to Zach's friends, they said that Zach had tried multiple times to end his relationship with Christina. That way he could have one relationship with Aileen. However, Christina made that nearly impossible. It was said that when Zach tried to end the relationship, Christina would get incredibly angry. She would always find a way to get back into Zach's life, and she would also make threats towards Zach, saying that if he ever left her, that she would make him disappear. So that was the reason that Zach had said that he couldn't really fully end the relationship with Christina. He kept saying that he was trying to, it wasn't working, she wasn't letting him, this, that, and the other, but he also wanted to explore his relationship with Aileen. So he was more so just seeing both women at the same time. But then things shifted in the year 2017, so about a year after Aileen and Zach were seeing each other, because Aileen actually unexpectedly at this time lost her job as the property manager, leaving her unemployed. And this is when Zach presented her with a job opportunity of working at the used car dealership that him and Christina own. So now you had Christina and Zach working at the car dealership and Aileen working at the car dealership because she accepted the job offer. So now you had the three of them all together at this same dealership. And this started out as a recipe for disaster because with the two girls, Christina and Aileen, constantly around each other, they both were pressuring Zach to break up with the other one. Aileen was really pressuring Zach to break up with Christina once and for all. And even though Zach did attempt to do this, as I mentioned multiple times, there came a point where Christina actually approached Zach with a potential solution to their problem that no one was expecting. Christina suggested that instead of breaking up with one or the other, instead they all three should try dating each other and all collectively be in a throuple together. Now, initially, Aileen was very, very against this. She immediately shut this idea down at first, and whether she thought that shutting it down would mean that Zach would automatically want to be with her or whatever her thought process was, it was clear when Christina presented this idea that Zach actually was very interested in doing this. And so because of that, over time, Aileen changed her mind and decided that she would also be a part of this throuple. Aileen told her friends that she was going to just try this out. It was going to be a trial run that she did for a little bit of time. She was going to see how things went. Now, it did not take long for problems within this throuple to begin. According to Mike, he said that Christina and Aileen would get into many arguments inside this throuple and about the dynamic of their relationship. There was clear jealousy between Christina and Aileen, and not only would these be verbal arguments, but a lot of times these fights escalated into physical altercations between the women. Now, Eileen's best friend also said that Zach was very physically abusive, specifically towards Aileen. Aileen would call her sister Francesca or her best friend and tell them about the abuse that she was experiencing. One time, Aileen even had to go to the emergency room because of the injuries that she sustained, but Aileen refused to leave the relationship, and she also did not want to involve authorities because of Christina's connections to law enforcement, and because Aileen thought that by including law enforcement with Christina's connections, it was going to make everything more complicated. And along with that, Aileen definitely felt a certain sense of being trapped within this relationship because not only was she in a throuple with Zach and Christina, she was in a throuple with her bosses. The three of them worked together, and she was financially dependent on Zach and Christina because she needed the job that she had. Let's take a moment and talk about my favorite brand. Let's talk Skims. When creating any outfit, we typically only focus on what we're wearing on the outside and not necessarily what's underneath. For example, typically I would focus on making sure that my top matches matched my jeans or that my dress looked good with my shoes. But then I discovered Skims, and let me tell you guys, it changed the game. I was now focused more on what I was wearing underneath because the comfort and quality that Skims provides are absolutely unmatched, and I will never go back. Putting on my Skims while getting dressed has now redefined my feel good, look good mentality. One of my favorites is their Fits Everybody dipped front thong. You guys know I have talked about this time and time again. This is the most comfortable article of clothing that I've put on my body. Hands down, I am not kidding. I swear to you that I have never bought another pair of underwear since trying these, and I will never go back. I never knew underwear could be this comfortable while simultaneously being so flattering. And when I pair it with a bra like the Fits Everybody push-up bra, you guys, it's just game over. I never knew that I could find a bra that looked as good as it felt, or vice versa. I always felt like I had to compromise. I always felt like I had to be uncomfortable for it to look good. But once I found the Fits Everybody line, I have not looked back since. It gives the perfect amount of lift without feeling heavy or bulky. Nothing is poking, nothing is squeezing or making me feel like I need to rip it off halfway through the day. Trust me, guys, you are going to love it. So shop my favorite bras and underwear at skims.com, and after you place your order, be sure to let them know that I sent you. Select podcast in the survey and be sure to select my show in the drop-down menu that follows. Now, you can imagine with everything that was going on, everything that Aileen was telling her sisters and her best friends, you can imagine the shock that they had when they heard that in 2018, Aileen had decided that she was actually going to move in with Christina and Zach. So now not only were they all working together and in a relationship together, but now the three of them were going to be living together. And this was a very toxic relationship. Now, Francesca said that even though she was shocked, Aileen told her that she was going to do this to give the relationship one final shot. She thought that this was the last resort to see if this throuple could work. She was going to give it a 1 to 2 month trial run. Again, with the trial run, she was going to give it a trial run to see how living together would be. But only after several weeks of living together, Aileen had enough. She realized that this was not the relationship for her. She realized how toxic everything was, and she had enough with the relationship, and she had made plans to move out. But Aileen's plans got sidetracked on April 7th of 2018. And on the specific day, Zach and Christina had gotten into a very violent argument. In the midst of this argument, Aileen took Zach's phone and called her best friend from Zach's phone and told her best friend that she was going to leave with Zach just to get him out of the house and separate him and Christina. That way they could both get some breathing room and have this fight die down. And Aileen was not trying to run off with Zach in any way, shape, or form. However, that is the way that Christina interpreted this. While Aileen was thinking, I'm just going to get Zach in the car and take him somewhere. Let's go get a coffee. Let's go to the park. Let's go just take a walk. Let's let this fight air out a little bit. Christina viewed this as Aileen physically taking Zach away from her and the two of them running off together. So Christina was absolutely furious about this. She actually even ended up calling Aileen's best friend and told her that she was going to report the car that Aileen and Zach took as stolen as a punishment for leaving her behind. She was going to get the police involved. It was going to be this whole thing. And Aileen's best friend was communicating these messages between Aileen and Christina. And Aileen actually left her cell phone and her wallet at the house when she left with Zach. So Aileen got in the car with Zach, only had Zach's belongings, and drove off and left her belongings at the house with Christina. But when Aileen's best friend got in contact with Aileen and told Aileen that Christina was very upset and that she was going to get law enforcement involved, instead of turning the car back around, Aileen and Zach did the opposite, and they decided that they were going to go on a road trip. They were going to use this as an opportunity to just get away for a little bit, and they began driving straight for the state of Georgia. Aileen texted her friends off of Zach's phone that this was ultimately going to be a good thing, and it was going to be good that her and Zach were going to have some quality time together. But again, as you can imagine, this sent Christina into a full-on rage. She actually sent over 150 text messages to Zach's phone over the course of 24 hours. These included threats saying that her dad was going to be in contact with them, saying that she was going to press charges on them. But it only took Christina about 48 hours after Aileen and Zach had left that she began to change her tune and her approach a little bit. She began texting Zach, asking the two of them to come back home. She apologized for the fight. She wanted everything to be good. She wanted to just live happily ever after. That was the tune that these new text messages were giving off. That was the approach that Christina was now taking. And Aileen and Zach decided that instead of turning all the way back around and going home, let's invite Christina on the road trip with us. So they had Christina fly into Dallas, and Aileen and Zach picked Christina up at the Dallas airport. And the three of them were now set on this road trip. They turned the car around and they were headed back to Florida together. But it did not take long for problems to arise once the three of them were all back together again. Once they began driving back to Florida and were on day 10 of this road trip, and by day 10, I mean day 10 collectively, not day 10 of Christina being there, just day 10 of being on the road in general for Aileen and Zach. This is when Aileen finally got in contact with her sister Francesca. At this point, Aileen was in New Orleans and she called Francesca, and Francesca could immediately tell in her sister's voice that something was very wrong. On the phone, Aileen began telling her sister that she was afraid of Zach and Christina. And not only that, she specified it as much as to say that she was afraid that Zach and Christina were going to kill her. Now, knowing the history of abuse and toxicity that her sister had experienced, Francesca, rightfully so, took her words very, very seriously. She told Aileen to technically and basically run. She told Aileen to run to the nearest gas station to try and get help and to run away from Zach and Christina. And this was very difficult for Francesca, as you can imagine, because Aileen did not give very many details or information to her sister about her whereabouts or where her location was. All Aileen did was express her worry. And again, this was around April 17th at this point. And Francesca said that she felt helpless during this phone call because she did not know where Aileen was. Aileen would not tell her sister her exact location. So all Francesca could do when Aileen hung up the phone was hope that Aileen would stay safe. Now, as the second week of this road trip approached, Zach, Christina, and Aileen had entered into a new area of Florida. They had entered into an area of Florida called Apalachicola, and this is also known as the Forgotten Coast because of how small this area is. And Zach, Christina, and Aileen were actually planning on going to Panama City. That was where they had their sights set, but they actually missed an exit, which is what led them to the Forgotten Coast. So that's why they were there. Now, surveillance footage showed Aileen, Christina, and Zach entering into Franklin County, which again was in Apalachicola, on the night of April 21st. They went to a popular restaurant in town called the Red Pirate. They played miniature golf, and they continued their party through the night. Now, based off of the recommendation of a local, the trio spent the night in the Sportsman's Lodge Motel. Now, they ended up reserving the last available room for the night, which was room 15. After their night out on the 21st, the trio decided that they were going to continue their party into the 22nd. They were not going to get back on the road the next day. They were just going to hang out and have a party instead. So they woke up on the 22nd and they went to the liquor store. At the liquor store, the three of them were captured on surveillance footage purchasing large bottles of vodka and Fireball. The employee who was actually checking them out at the time had noticed that they had purchased the largest bottle of Fireball available, which stood out to them because she remembered only three of them buying it. And it is a large amount of alcohol for three people to consume. So it definitely struck her, and she remembered being shocked that three people were buying that big of a bottle. After purchasing the bottles of alcohol, they then went back to their motel room and began drinking. Aileen last spoke to her best friend on April 22nd. She had a phone call with her best friend, and on this phone call, Aileen again was expressing her fear for Zach and Christina, but specifically towards Zach. Every time she was talking about how scared she was, it mainly was towards Zach, her fear never really stemmed from Christina. It was always towards Zach whenever she was talking about the toxicity and abuse she was enduring. Now, on this phone call with her best friend remembers Aileen telling her that she was going to leave him. She said, quote, "I need to leave him. I'm telling you, I'm like a sex slave. He has this really scary look in his eye. It's very scary. It's different. I need your help." End quote. Now, it was after Aileen said this on this call that her best friend told her that she would help Aileen craft an escape plan. Her friend actually bought Aileen a bus ticket so Aileen would get on a bus in Tampa, which is where the trio was headed to next. On April 23rd, they were planning on driving to Tampa, Florida, and her best friend told her to step away from Zach and Christina, somehow be able to get away from them, get on the bus. The bus would take Aileen from Tampa to Miami, and her best friend would pick her up at the bus station. So that was the plan that they created together for Aileen to get on the bus the following day and travel back to Miami herself. So that was the plan. And Aileen hung up the phone confirming that plan with her best friend. However, sadly, that never happened. On April 23rd, 2018, the Franklin County Dispatch in Florida received a phone call after a couple had been driving alongside the road and discovered a body right off of Highway 98 in Apalachicola. When the police arrived at the scene, they discovered a female body about a foot away from the road, and unfortunately, this body was Aileen. Aileen had bruises all over her body when she was discovered, and it was very clear to police that this was a murder of extreme violence. It was overkill, and Aileen suffered terribly before her death. Now, the lieutenant on this case, Lieutenant Jones, he was there when Aileen's body was discovered. He was one of the first people there after that 911 phone call was placed, and he noticed that whoever disposed of Aileen's body, whoever was responsible for this, definitely seemed like they were trying to get rid of Aileen in a hurry. They seemed like they had just dropped her body off and left. Whoever disposed of her body, it just seemed like rushed and sloppy work is what he remembered. Now, at this time, police also received a phone call from the Sportsman's Lodge Motel, and this call that was made concerned a specific motel room. It was said that when the housekeepers went in to clean this room, they noticed a significant amount of blood throughout the room, and that room in question was room number 15, the same room that Zach, Christina, and Aileen were all in. Now, when the housekeepers walked in, they noticed that the furniture was knocked over, the bed sheets were missing, and one of the mattresses was soaked in blood stains. When Lieutenant Jones walked into room 15, he noticed the blood and the disheveled room. He also noticed that there was a smell of vinegar throughout the room, telling him that whoever was in there had attempted to clean up the crime scene. Now, the forensics team did perform a luminol test in room 15 and uncovered a crime scene that was even worse than what police originally thought. The entire bathroom of room 15 had remnants of blood and blood spatter that had been attempted to be cleaned. The shower curtain rod also had blood stains on it, as well as a palm print. Forensics were able to confirm through DNA blood testing that the blood found in room 15 did in fact belong to Aileen Seiden. Now, Fort Lauderdale, Florida is where Zach and Christina's friend Mike lived, and he was home alone on the night of the 23rd when he got a knock on his door, and he was very surprised to see Christina and Zach standing on his doorstep. Now, Mike obviously let the two of them in, and when he let them in, he was asking them where they were, what they were doing, and also asked them where Aileen was. Now, according to Mike, he said that Christina quickly stated that Aileen had ran away. That was just her first automatic reaction, but Mike said that he knew that that was definitely not true. He knew that Aileen wouldn't do that, and he very quickly called Christina on this and said that he did not believe it. Now, at this point, Christina had walked out of the room, leaving Mike and Zach alone together. Mike said at this point he looked at Zach, who was visibly choking up and visibly upset. And that is when Zach looked back at Mike and said, "She's dead." Zach went on to say that while he was sleeping, Christina murdered Aileen. When he woke up, he saw Aileen lying dead next to him, and he said that he tried giving Aileen CPR and wanted to call 911, but Christina would not let him. Throughout this conversation, Zach kept telling Mike that he needed to protect Christina. He couldn't call 911. He needed to protect Christina. And from Mike's standpoint, Mike said at this point he was concerned for his own safety if he called 911. He was afraid that Zach and Christina would hurt him as well. So instead, he decided that he needed to get in contact with Christina's dad because Christina had let everyone know, made everyone aware that her dad was involved in law enforcement. So he knew that he needed to get in contact with Christina's father, who was Colonel Araujo. And when he did, when Mike was able to get in contact with him, because he spent that whole night up Googling and researching and trying to track down Christina's dad. And when he did, he called Christina's dad and told him that he needed to speak to him about his daughter Christina and that it was a very, very pressing matter. Christina's dad then told Mike to meet him the following day at a very odd location. He told Mike to meet him at a gas station, but nonetheless, Mike went to this meeting. He walked up to Christina's dad's car and told him Christina killed somebody. Now, obviously, her father was very taken aback, and the first thing that he said to Mike was, "You know I'm a cop, right?" Mike told him that yes, he knew he was a cop, and that was exactly why he was telling him. Christina's dad then told Mike to wait right there and eventually brought Mike down to the sheriff's office to make a formal statement. Now, afterwards, there were different detectives who spoke with Mike. Christina's dad stopped having any involvement with Mike after he brought him to the sheriff's department, so Mike was working with different detectives. Now, these detectives had actually shown Mike a picture of Aileen's body that was found the day prior, and that is when Mike confirmed that that was in fact Aileen. Once Mike gave police that confirmation, that is when police drove over to Mike's house because, again, Christina and Zach were still at Mike's house at this time. So police drove over to Mike's home, and they were lucky that they got there when they did because while they were pulling up, Christina and Zach were on the way out the door. But luckily, Christina and Zach were arrested and charged right then and there with first-degree murder. Now, it actually wasn't until January of 2024, so just last year and 6 years after Aileen's murder, that Zach faced his trial. He pled not guilty and stood before the jury in his trial. And the star witness, the star testimony in Zach's trial was, to really everyone's surprise, Christina. Because Christina actually took a plea deal in this. Christina pled guilty to second-degree murder, and part of her plea deal was testifying against Zach. During Zach's trial, Christina testified her account of what happened on the night of April 22nd, 2018. She stated that on that evening, Aileen, Zach, and herself were all in the motel room relaxing together. They were drinking. They had been drinking the entirety of the day. And according to her, she said that while they were all hanging out together, Aileen had asked Christina a question, and the question was only, "Christina, guess what?" So that was all Aileen said, but Aileen never got the chance to finish the question because according to Christina, she said that after Aileen said this, Zach got up off of the bed, went over to Aileen and began punching her and hitting her. She said that Zach began yelling at Aileen, saying that she was always trying to start problems, and Christina admitted that in that moment, she also joined in and began punching and hitting and beating Aileen, asking Aileen what she was about to say, taunting Aileen, but Aileen never spoke afterwards. Christina said that she got so worked up and so overwhelmed and so frustrated that she actually left the room for 15 minutes. So Christina says that she joined in with Zach, she's beating Aileen up, but then she has this moment where she is so frustrated and she leaves the room for 15 minutes, and when she comes back, Aileen and Zach were in the bathroom, and Zach was hitting Aileen with a shower curtain rod, which was consistent with the medical examiner's findings because the medical examiner discovered that the palm print that was found on the shower curtain rod was confirmed to be Zach's palm print. So Christina stated that Zach was hitting Aileen with the shower curtain rod, and then the assault and the attack moved back onto the bed. Now, Zach had a wooden walking stick for whatever reason, and according to Christina, he took the walking stick and began hitting grabbing Aileen and beating her with that stick so hard that the stick actually broke. And police did find remnants of the walking stick in room 15 when they were going through the crime scene. Christina said that things then took a turn when Zach began to sexually assault Aileen with the pieces of the wooden walking stick. According to Christina, she said that that is when things went too far and she told Zach to stop. However, he would not. She said that eventually she actually put herself in between Zach and Aileen so Zach would stop, and eventually he did. Now, Christina said that even though Aileen was badly beaten, she was still alive when they went to bed. And Christina said that she did not think that Aileen was going to die. And it wasn't until she woke up the next morning and realized that Aileen was dead that she felt an obligation to help Zach cover up what he had done out of fear of what he would do to her. So she's saying that she helped him cover it up because she was so afraid that he would do the same thing to her. Now, while Christina did seem remorseful on the stand, there are many conflicting opinions about Christina's account of what happened, because others have felt that Christina is incredibly manipulative and Christina is incredibly dominating. And like I mentioned in the beginning, many people said that when looking at the dynamic between Zach and Christina, Christina really led the relationship between her and Zach. Zach really followed Christina's lead. So many people had problems believing this story that Christina was telling. They felt that maybe Christina was just trying to shy away from the fact of how much involvement she had by putting all of the blame onto Zach, while others believe that Christina did admit to her fault. She did admit where she went wrong in her involvement, but that Zach was also involved in the primary aggressor in this. But as you can imagine, Zach's lawyers felt like Christina was the instigator in this murder and that she acted alone. Zach's lawyers really went with his version of events, of him going to bed one night after a long day of drinking and him waking up and Aileen being dead in the bed next to him after Christina had beaten her to death. That is Zach's account of what happened. The defense claimed that Christina was the one with homicidal intent. They said that she was the one sending threatening messages before meeting up with Aileen and Zach on the road trip. There was also toll booth surveillance of Christina and Zach in the car after the murder occurred when they were driving to Fort Lauderdale when they went to Mike's house, and Christina was the one driving the car. And the defense tried to use this as some sort of reasoning or some sort of example of Christina being in control. Like, oh, look, Christina's driving the car. Christina had to be the one who was driving this whole plan to murder as well. So that is what the defense tried to frame it as. Now, the medical examiner also took the stand at this trial and said that Aileen's injuries were so severe that it reminded him of someone who had been in a vehicle accident, so in a very bad car crash. Now, Zach chose not to testify in his trial. The defense, like I said, tried to blame Christina and stated that Zach had no motive in murdering Aileen, whereas Christina did, and that motive was jealousy. Now, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury did reach a verdict, and the jury found Zach Abel guilty of second-degree murder. So they actually charged him with a lesser charge. He was on trial for first-degree murder, but they charged him with second-degree murder, and him and Christina were both getting the second-degree murder charge. But because Christina was cooperative, she took the plea deal, she testified against Zach, she was sentenced to 25 years in prison, whereas Zach was given the maximum sentence for this charge, which was life in prison. So that is where we stand on this case. And as I mentioned to you in the very beginning, this is where you come in. I'm very curious to know your thoughts. Where do you think this case lies? Do you believe that Zach was the main aggressor? Do you believe Christina's recount of what had happened on the night of April 22nd? Let me know in the comments below and we will continue on the conversation with this case. But with that being said, you guys, it's going to be all for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in to another exclusive episode of Killer Instinct here on Patreon. As always, make sure you check out the Killer Instinct episode that goes live tomorrow as well. Tomorrow we cover the case, the brutal murder of Warren Barnes, and how police, in my opinion, stopped a future potential serial killer in the making. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on that one as well. I will be back next week with a brand new one for you guys, and I will see you then. And until then, stay safe. Bye, guys.